It's a bit of the week here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com Wednesday edition with me, Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You know that website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You know the deal. If you are a Pitt fan, you want to hang out with other Pitt fans, you want to talk to other Pitt fans online, you want to stay up to date on the latest Pitt sports news, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Panther-Lair.com. It's a place to go for all that. And of course, we have our video channel here on YouTube, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, wherever that is. I can point to the subscribe button. I don't know where the like button shows up. Is it down there somewhere? So click that as well. Like and subscribe. That's what we always try and ask you to do. And we appreciate everyone who does. And as we get to the middle of the week, we talked a lot of basketball yesterday on the Morning Pitt in the aftermath of Pitt opening the 2022-2023 season with a win over UT Martin on Monday night. We're flipping back into football here, and we'll talk about this matchup against Virginia on Saturday. We'll talk about that quite a bit over the next couple of days. But today I wanted to take a bit of a broader view or a bigger picture view of this program, and more particularly this roster, and what it could look like next year. And specifically, what's interesting to me today is the topic of the super seniors, or the potential super seniors. Everybody who was on a roster in 2020 has the option to take one extra year of eligibility. It's how Kenny Pickett played last year, as we know. It's how a bunch of these offensive linemen came back this year: Owen Drexel and Gabe Hoy and Carter Warren and Marcus Minor. It's how Deslin Alexandra came back this year. It's how Tyler Wiltz ended up having an extra year of eligibility to play this season. It's that, and we call them super seniors, right? It's not a senior, it's not a redshirt senior, it's a super senior. And eventually we'll work our way out of these guys. We'll work past this group. The current juniors were on rosters in 2020. And redshirt sophomores were on rosters in 2020, but that's it. So, guys who are currently have junior eligibility, or guys who are redshirt sophomores right now, which is, I think there's 23 scholarship juniors, either juniors or redshirt juniors. Those guys will have the option to play 2 more years after this if they are so inclined. And then redshirt sophomores, there's only a handful of them. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and those guys will have the option to play an extra year. Really, actually, redshirt sophomores will have next year, 2023, they'll have 2024, and then the option to come back in 2025. And at that point, you'll have, kind of shifted these super seniors and these guys with this extra eligibility off the roster, and it won't be something to think about and talk about in the offseason. And those numbers will continue to dwindle. There's a lot, there were a lot last year who had to make that decision. There's a lot this year who have to make that decision. There's going to be a decent amount next year who have to make that decision. But it'll keep sort of going down. Like I said, by the time you get to the guys who are redshirt sophomores, who will have to make a decision after the 2024 season. We're talking about Branson Taylor, Sam Williams, Aiden Henningham, Javante Royal, and Ben Sauls. So you're what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys. And chances are in 3 years, not all 5 of those guys will even still be on the roster. So you're going to filter that group out. You're going to filter out these guys who could potentially come back as super seniors. But we're not to that point yet. And I started thinking about this week because on Monday, during the Monday press conference, I asked Pat Narduzzi about Kedon Slovis specifically. Narduzzi made a comment about how he hopes Sibo Flemister comes back. The Notre Dame transfer could come back as a super senior in 2023. He said he hopes Sibo Flemister comes back next year. And that got me to thinking, and it was a question I had been wanting to ask Narduzzi anyway. But the timing was good after he mentioned that about Sibo Flemister. I asked him about Kedon Slovis. Kedon Slovis is a senior this year, played 3 years at USC, and now this 1 year at Pitt. And he's got the option to come back next year as a super senior, kind of like Kenny Pickett did. And so I asked him, do you have a sense of what Kedon wants to do next season. Here was his answer, quote, "We're going to have that conversation. I think let's let the season play out. Really have not had it, and you've got senior day in 2 weeks. We'll have to figure it out soon who's going to walk out there, who's not. Again, as you guys know, some guys will walk out for senior day and some guys won't, and it doesn't mean they aren't going either. There's decisions to be made for a lot of people come the end of the season." And, a couple of things in there. They have like senior day, like Narduzzi said, in 2 weeks, that game against Duke. And there will probably be seniors who are announced that day who do return as super seniors, return for an extra year of eligibility. I think a number of those offensive linemen were recognized at senior day last year. I think Kenny Pickett was 2 years ago before he made the decision to come back. And so it's not a sure thing if some of those guys go on senior day. But it is a little bit of an indication. I think you can read a little bit into it. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that situation. But it really is, there's a lot of guys. Narduzzi is right. There are a lot of guys who are going to have to make a decision. On the roster right now, Pitt has 27 scholarship seniors. By my count, 20 of them will have the option to return next season. 20 guys out of 27. I mean, only 7 guys can't come back. The list of guys who cannot return, who have used their super senior eligibility, is short with only 7 guys. There's a quarterback, Derek Kyler. Offensive linemen, Owen Drexel and Gabe Hoy and Carter Warren and Marcus Minor. Defensive end, Delson Alexandra. And then the linebacker, Tyler Wiltz. Those guys are all, they cannot come back. But the other 20 can. And that's what I think is really interesting, and that's what I thought we would talk about today. I always like to say that these Morning Pitt videos give you something to think about for the day or something to talk about with other Pitt fans. Well, let's run down this list and see who we think will come back, who could come back, and who you would want back, who would help the team the most if they did return. And there's no sense burying the lead or getting to skipping over the one or trying to save the biggest one for last. I mean, the quarterback position is a big question mark for next season and has a lot of implications depending on the decisions that are made. And it is decisions plural because Nick Patty and Kedon Slovis both have the option to come back next season as super seniors. And I don't know what they're intending to do. I really don't. I don't have any inside info. I'm not sure if Pitt really has a strong sense of what's going to happen there. With each guy individually, like Nick Patty, does Nick Patty want to come back to be a backup for the 6th year? Does he want to spend a 6th season as a backup, or does he want to transfer out, potentially even go to like a lower level, go to like a Fordham or somewhere like that, or a James Madison even, or even like a Marshall or someplace? You know what I mean? Even a group of 5 or just a non-Power 5 program and be the starting quarterback. Or does he want to stay here and compete for the job and probably ultimately end up being the backup? And part of his decision could be tied to what Kedon Slovis decides, but I think Patty's an interesting guy. I think he genuinely does like being at Pitt. I think he appreciates being at Pitt. I think he appreciates what Pitt has on a lot of levels. After he got his shoulder busted in the Peach Bowl, I think he appreciates that he came back and it was pretty much fixed up. Like, I don't even know if it was 48 hours. And that kind of access to healthcare and health management is something, I don't know if it's entirely unique to Pitt, but I mean, they obviously have a state-of-the-art, they have state-of-the-art medical facilities here, which is pretty valuable. And I think Nick Patty appreciated that. You know what I mean? Appreciated being, having that available to him in the aftermath of that injury. Is that enough to get him to come back? Even if it means being a backup for the 6th year to finish his college career as a career backup, as opposed to going somewhere else and maybe have an opportunity to start? I don't know. That's something Nick Patty has to decide for himself. I don't think I could fault him either way. If he decides he's going to go somewhere else and play and really enjoy that final year of college football, I say go for it, But I could see it going either way. And some of it might depend on what Kedon Slovis decides to do. I don't know if Slovis or Pat Narduzzi would ever admit this, publicly at least. I don't know if they would ever say it, but I would have to imagine that when Kedon Slovis decided to come to Pitt, when he agreed to come to Pitt, when he committed, when he was getting recruited, all through that whole process, I have to imagine that the assumption was that he would come in for 1 year, have a really good year, and go to the NFL. I have to think that was the assumption. I have to think that was Slovis's plan. I have to think that was Pitt's assumption in bringing him in. I can't believe that the coaches brought him in thinking, we're going to get this guy for 2 years. I can't believe that Kedon Slovis came here thinking, I'm going to go to Pitt for 2 years. I think the plan was a one and done, bridge the gap to get to Nate Yarnell or Kenny Minchie, or whatever quarterback recruit they would bring in this class of 2023, or even Nick Patty. I have to believe that was the plan. I have to believe it was not the plan for Slovis to be sitting on 5 touchdown passes and 6 interceptions through 9 games. And I think that changes the equation. It's hard for me to imagine Kedon Slovis trying to go to the NFL right now with the way his season has gone. Could he transfer to another school? I suppose that possibility would be out there. He would probably go as a graduate transfer. And, that would give him the opportunity to play right away, I would think. So maybe that would be on the table if he genuinely doesn't think he's going to have an opportunity to really succeed here. If he doesn't think it's going to work out for him here, that would be on the table for Slovis. But, at this point, if I had to bet on something, I would probably bet on him coming back to be the starting quarterback for a second year and to try and do better. Try and have a better season than he had this year. So, and then I think his decision is ultimately going to impact what Nick Patty decides to do. As you move down through the positions, you get to the running backs. There are 2 senior running backs on this roster, Vincent Davis and Sebo Flemister, and they both could come back in 2023 as super seniors. I think we all sort of assume that Izzy Abanikanda is not going to return. That doesn't necessarily, that's a very talented player, but there's still going to be some depth and some talent in this running back room. Rodney Hammond, I think, has shown he can be a big-time back. And, Sebo Flemister was pretty intriguing with what he did on Saturday in his limited opportunities. 10 carries, I think, for 42 yards and a touchdown. He had some real burst. He had some explosion. I don't know if he just had some pent-up frustration from not getting a lot of opportunities this year, but he ran with purpose. He ran like a player who had not been on the field in a long time or had not carried the ball in a long time. I wouldn't be surprised if Sebo Flemister does come back. I thought it was interesting that Pat Narduzzi said he hopes that Flemister returns. I wouldn't be surprised if he does. Vincent Davis, I'm not sure what to think of. I could see Vincent Davis deciding he's going to go back closer to home, go back to Florida, go back to the South Florida area, maybe transfer to another school for his final year of eligibility. I can't imagine that he would really make a run at the NFL after what his career and his senior season have been. But I could see him, potentially deciding that he wants to go play somewhere else, using his extra year of eligibility, but maybe not necessarily using it here. I could see that. I could also see him finishing up his career in Pitt as a 3-headed monster of Rodney Hammond and Vincent Davis and Sebo Flemister, which wouldn't be the worst thing. You wouldn't want to have any injuries to that group, but that wouldn't be a bad trio to ride with. So we'll see what those 2 guys decide. There's one senior receiver, it's Jared Wayne. And, Wayne's interesting to me. I think he's going to get some looks at the NFL. I think as much as anybody, and I think there are a few guys that would fall into this category, as much as anybody, I think that he's going to kind of base it on feedback from the NFL, of whether or not he can make it in the NFL, of whether or not he could be drafted based on what he's done in his career, through 4 seasons. I kind of expect Jared Wayne to return. That's actually kind of my expectation here, which would obviously be a big boost for the receiving core next year. You move on to the offensive linemen, and I think there's some key guys here. Jake Cradle and Blake Zabovic both have the option to return as a 6th-year super senior next season. I think Pitt would very much like to have them back and could very much use those 2 experienced offensive linemen, and it would probably be in their best interest to do so as well. I'm not sure if Cradle or Zabovic are draft prospects at this point. Zabovic hasn't been a full season starter in his career. Cradle's been playing out of position, for half of this season or more. He could ultimately move back to guard. Owen Drexel was dressed for the game against Syracuse, so maybe there's a possibility of Drexel getting back on the field and Cradle moving back to guard and kind of shifting things around. Cradle could also be looking at a future career as a center. Because even if you fast forward to next season, if both of those guys return, you should have Ryan Jacoby ready to step in at left guard and go, left to right, Jacoby Cradle-Zubovic as your two guards and your center. I could see that playing out, but I think it would benefit both of those guys, and it would certainly be in Pitt's best interest if they return. Defensive end is really interesting. Defensive end is really interesting. There's three guys who could potentially come back as super seniors. It's Haba Baldonado, John Morgan, and Chris Maloney. Maloney we haven't seen a lot of. He appeared on the depth chart this week after Dayon Hayes was removed following his arrest on assault charges. But Baldonado and Morgan are the two guys who are really interesting to me. I don't think there's any question that Baldonado's season has been a disappointment in terms of productivity. He has 1 sack and 4 tackles for loss this season in 9 games. I think he's played all 9. I know he's been banged up and missed some time here and there. He's played 8 games, but he's got 1 sack and 4 tackles for loss. Desmond Alexandra on the other side of the line has played in 6 games. He's got 5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks. The production drop-off for Baldonado is just remarkable. And Panaruzzi talked about it this week, talked about how, NFL scouts still seem to be really impressed with Baldonado, that he's getting close to making the plays, and that impresses them enough. They believe in what they see, and they still think very highly of him. I gotta think that another year where he could potentially increase his productivity would be huge for Haba Baldonado and his NFL draft prospects. I don't know what he's going to do. I wouldn't be surprised really either way. I guess I would probably, if you told me I had to pick one or the other, I would guess that he's going to go. But I wouldn't be surprised either way. And I wouldn't be surprised if he decides to come back because he's obviously got more that he can put on tape. He's got more that he can show in terms of production. And Morgan is sort of the same way. Morgan has 1 sack this season. And he's a guy that I think there were high expectations both from himself and from the Pitt coaching staff about breaking out and having a big breakout year. Well, he's got 4 tackles for loss and 1 sack. David Green, the defensive tackle, has 2.5 sacks. Solomon DeShields, an outside linebacker who mostly plays in a defensive sub package, has 4 sacks. Kalijah Cansey obviously has 4 sacks. John Morgan, Haba Baldonado, and Shane Simon all have the same number of sacks. John Morgan, Haba Baldonado, and Bengali Kamara have the same number of sacks. John Morgan, Haba Baldonado, and Nakai Johnson and Sean Fitzsimmons have the same number of sacks. Tyler Bentley, a defensive tackle. The production is just so far below what was expected for those guys, what those guys needed to do, and what they were expected to do, and what they came to Pitt this season to do. I wonder if they give it another shot, if they take another year to try to improve those numbers and put more on tape, put more playmaking and finishing plays on tape. I think they've got good things on tape in terms of getting into the backfield, beating blocks. The ball is coming out quick. We've heard Randy Bates and Charlie Partridge and Pat Narduzzi talk about that all season, about how quarterbacks are throwing the ball quickly, and that's part of the reason that the sack numbers aren't what you would expect them to be with this defense. But I think Morgan and Baldonado could really stand to improve their statistics with another year in college, I think. Defensive tackle, all 3 of those guys, Tyler Bentley, Devin Danielson, and David Green, all can come back. I would think there's probably a good chance that they all do. It would be my guess. Just because I don't know if you look at any of those 3 and say, yeah, that guy is ready for the NFL right now. Or that guy's going to get drafted in the NFL right now. Linebacker is really interesting because Travassier Dennis, Brandon George, and Shane Simon can all come back as super seniors next year. George at this point has played, I was just looking at the stats on this, Brandon George has played 3 games, and he never redshirted. He played as a true freshman in 2020, I guess it was. Or 2019, excuse me. He's a true senior right now. So since he's only played in 3 games, he can actually use a red shirt this year and come back next year as a red shirt senior and actually have another year after that to play as a super senior. I don't think there's any question Brandon George is going to be on the roster, the Pitt roster next season. Potentially as a starting middle linebacker based on one of these other guys' decisions. And that's Travassier Dennis. And Servassier Dennis, I mean, unlike, the DNs that we were talking about, I mean, he's got the production. He's got 66 tackles this season, 9.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. He leads Pitt in sacks. He's second on the team in tackles for loss. He's got 2 pass breakups. He's forced a fumble. He's been as good as ever this season. And he has continually put up stats over the last 3 years. Either playing outside linebacker or inside linebacker. He's a smart player. I think he's going to play in the NFL. Question is just if he wants to go now or wait another year and try and hone his game a little bit more. I think if Dennis goes, then Brandon George is your starting middle linebacker next year. If Dennis returns, then you've got a really solid potential 2-deep there with Dennis and George at middle linebacker, Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields at outside, and potentially Shane Simon returning as well. Notre Dame transfer playing his first year at Pitt, potentially his only year at Pitt right now. He's a redshirt senior, but he could come back as a super senior next season too. And Simon, I think, has been a pleasant surprise. I didn't have high expectations for Shane Simon, but right now he's 6th on the team in tackles. He's got 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 5 pass breakups. He's forced a fumble and recovered a fumble. I think he's been a good, solid player. He's played some outside linebacker and stepped in the middle when Pitt has needed someone to step up and kind of fill in since Brandon George has been hurt. I think Shane Simon has been, like I say, a pleasant surprise. And, potentially if you got all 3 of those guys back, Brandon George, Servassier Dennis, and Shane Simon, boy, you'd have, to go along with Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields. And after them, I guess Buddy Mack would be in the mix there as well. I mean, that's a really strong 2-deep, or at least top 5. You haven't seen a lot of Buddy Mack so far, but your top 5 you feel really good about, I think. Particularly with some versatility in that group as well, if those guys were decided to come back. And then you have the defensive backs. And basically you have four guys who could potentially come back. Marquez Williams is a redshirt senior now. He could come back for 1 more year. A.J. Woods is a senior. He could come back for 1 more year. Same for Erick Hallett and Judson Tallender. Obviously, Hallett and Williams are starters. Woods is a reserve. Tallender is a reserve. I don't know where these guys are leaning. My thought is that at least with 3 out of those 4, they could put more on tape. They could have another year of seasoning, another year as a college football player to try to improve their draft stock. I think Erick Hallett might have a shot, right now. If he goes to the NFL, if he tests well, kind of follows that mold of the DeMar Hamlin, the Jason Pinnock, the Damari Mathis, guys who really work hard after the season so that they can impress with their testing and combine numbers. I could see Hallett doing that. He's got good film. He's got production in college. Where is he right now on the stats? He's 4th on the team in tackles with 32. He's got 3 tackles for loss, 3 interceptions, 6 pass breakups. He's recovered 2 fumbles. And that's been his, throughout his career, at least through the last couple of seasons, he's put up good numbers. He's been a productive player, and I think he'll probably look to go to the NFL. But Williams and Woods, do either of those guys, I don't know if either of those guys looks like an NFL player right now. And Tallender, it's a question of whether he wants to come back and potentially be a backup linebacker or a backup safety again. And some of that might depend on what Brandon Hill decides to do. Now, Hill is only a redshirt junior. So he's got, next year plus another year that he could come back and play at Pitt. But I also wouldn't be surprised after what he's done so far. This year he's got, he's 2nd on the team in tackles. He's, broken up a pass. He just plays well at that boundary safety position. If he decides to go, that might make it more appealing for Judson Tallender to come back and play another year at Pitt, where he could be that starting boundary safety. And so as we run down 20 guys, I can't say a ton of names jump out to me as guys I would say, boy, that guy's definitely gone. He's definitely not coming back. That's definitely going to be a spot they have open. But they are going to need some of these spots to open. They're going to need spots to open for a recruiting class. It's already getting, it's pretty decent size now. I'm surprised to see it grow a little bit more. And then transfers. There are going to be transfers they add this offseason. And the spaces they use to bring those transfers in, at least some of them are going to come from these 20 guys. Not to mention any other underclassmen who decide to transfer out. And there's going to be a bunch of those. I think Pitt had 17 transfers out last year. Since from August 1st to August 1st. From August 1st, 2021 to August 1st, 2022, they had about 17 transfers who left the program, which sounds like a lot, but I mean, I think you look at the guys who left. I mean, it's, for the most part, you had a lot of guys that weren't playing or probably weren't going to see the field. There are a few starters that hurt, obviously. There was one particular that was a real blow when he decided to transfer in the spring. But my point is, there are going to be spots that open up throughout the roster, not just in the senior class, spots that you can then use for recruits or use for incoming transfers. Those spots are going to open up. Some of them will come from those 20 guys I just mentioned, but there might be a decent chunk of those 20 who come back. This year, Pitt only had 7. This year, Pitt only had 7 super seniors on the roster, 7 guys, and actually only 5 of those were players who returned. Kyler and Wiltz were transfers who came in. Drexel, Hoy, Warren, Minor, and Alexandra, the super seniors who returned this year. I think they'll have more than 5. I think they'll have more than 5 who come back next season. I just don't know how many. I'm guessing there will be a few surprises, guys that I would not expect to go, and they end up leaving either to go to the NFL or to transfer somewhere else. But they have some decisions to make. There are some interesting decisions for some of these players to make, and I think there might be a few that surprise us when they ultimately come to pass over the next month and a half, somewhere around there. So we'll see. Something to think about today. Think about who you would like to have back, who could help the roster the most. Certainly, the DNs would be a big boost. The linebackers would be a big boost. Jared Wayne would be a big boost. And then you're going to get into some interesting situations if you get 1 or 2 quarterbacks returning. Could be real interesting to watch. But we'll see what happens there. Like I say, we'll get back into talk about Pitt, Virginia, and Pitt, West Virginia, since the backyard basket brawl is happening on Friday night at the Peterson Event Center. So we'll be talking about that game heading into Friday. We'll be talking about the Pitt, Virginia game throughout the rest of this week. Today, though, talk a little super seniors and who might come back to Pitt for next season. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel while you're here. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We appreciate that very much. Hope you've had a great week so far. You made it to the middle of the week, so have a great Wednesday. Don't forget, tonight, the live Panther-Lair show on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That starts at 8:30 p.m. tonight. We'll be talking about Pitt, Virginia. We'll be talking about Pitt basketball. We'll be talking about recruiting. We'll talk about super seniors. If you watch this video and you have questions about the super seniors and who might come back and who might leave, bring your question into the live stream tonight. You can get in the chat screen right over there on the side of the side of the screen. You can post your comments and your questions. We'll answer them and get through it all tonight, starting at 8:30 live right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks for checking it out today. We appreciate it. Hope you have a great rest of the day. We'll talk to you tonight for the live stream, and then we'll be back tomorrow morning, Thursday morning, for another Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.